Why, hello there, creeps, and welcome to another episode of Madams and Murderers. I'm your host, Malie Molino, and on today's episode, we'll be taking a road trip to one of my favorite California cities, San Diego. Hailed as the birthplace of California, sunny San Diego is truly a mix of modern California and the California of the past. To the northeast of downtown, you have Old Town, appropriately named because it's the first area that folks settled in the area. Today, it's a living relic where you can take your pick from a handful of incredible Mexican restaurants still making handmade tortillas, or you can explore the cemetery, the oldest in San Diego, where you can spend an hour reading the placards tucked around retelling the colorful lives of the residents who lived, died, and thrived there. If you're feeling brave, you can take a tour of the Whaley House, long considered one of, if not the most haunted home in America. Once a courthouse, theater, and mercantile, the home where both family members killed themselves and the backyard where criminals were hung continues to terrify tourists year after year with sightings of ghostly phenomenon. And if you pay attention to where you're walking on your walk there, you'll notice brass inlays in the sidewalk marking grave sites all along the path. However, Old Town is not why we came down here today. We came down here to visit what was once called Newtown, and today is more commonly known as the Gas Lamp District, named for the still in use gas lamps that light the sidewalks. Geeks and nerds alike will be familiar with this area because it's the backdrop to Comic-Con each year. But some 100 years ago, this area was home to over 100 brothels, gambling halls, and saloons. Creeps, it's time we tell the tale of San Diego's red light district, the Stingaree. In an early season of Macabre Mondays, I featured the William Heath Davis house, the only surviving salt box style house in California. Because of the timber shortage, these homes were manufactured in Portland, Maine, and then shipped to California. The home is also the oldest surviving structure in downtown San Diego, dating back to 1850, and it's where I captured more orb phenomena than anywhere else I've ever visited. The home was originally one of 8, purchased by wealthy merchant and trader William Heath Davis, who was the visionary behind Newtown. Because of the access to the harbor, he knew the area could be a boom town, and he was right. He was also just like 100 years too early. The original venture failed, and the area was even referred to as Davis's Folly. He would later relocate to the Bay Area where he would die, not totally poor, but also not in a great position. In 1867, another prominent San Diegan, Alonzo Horton, known affectionately as the father of San Diego, and his wife moved into the home while they waited for their mansion to be built. He also saw a bright future for Newtown and developed his own section of the area. It did better, however, Horton would also not live to see the area become what he'd hoped. Despite him giving the city amazing things like Balboa Park, which is one of my personal favorite places in the world, Horton would die close to penniless, just as Davis had. The houses would see a new life in 1873 when Anna Shepard purchased the home for use as a hospital, because every creepy house just needs to be a hospital at some point. I highlight the Horton Davis home because it is the Stingaree personified. Nice on the outside, but full of lost dreams, death, and debauchery in the inside. The area that was supposed to become the elite neighborhood of San Diego became a town of thieves, prostitutes, and gamblers. The sailors rolling off the ships in the harbor were but a few feet away from what was essentially a pleasure fair. Now, prostitution and gambling were in fact illegal. However, there was this little thing called the vice trade. This is how it worked. A district would be labeled as restricted, and what that meant was that illicit acts would be tolerated as long as they stayed within the boundary of that district. Oh, and all of these illicit businesses would have to give a kickback to the cops to look the other way. If anyone is shocked the cops took bribery payments, then you really haven't looked into your city's history. Newtown now had a new nickname, Stingaree, a play on the word stingray because everyone could get stung in the stingaree. I didn't make this up, folks. In the Stingaree, you had over 100 illegal businesses, and its reputation rivaled that of the Barbary Coast and the Bay. People like Wyatt Earp, famed lawman turned bad, caught wind of the Stingaree and made the move, setting up his own handful of businesses, 4 saloons and gambling halls to be exact, that earned him upwards of $1,000 a night. That's an insane amount of money in today's dollars, so you can only imagine the amount of wealth he was rolling in. Of course, it wasn't just the men that were making a killing in the Stingaree. The madams of the area were also turning out quite a fortune, and it's those ladies that I'm excited to talk about. Thankfully, almost all of the commerce buildings from this time are still standing in the gas lamp. My favorite structure is the Louis Bank Commerce Building, an impressive Baroque revival structure built in 1888 that is now called the Queen of the Gas Lamp. She is truly stunning. The building was built by cobbler-turned-capitalist Isidore Louis. The bank was there until 1893 before being replaced with a restaurant and ice cream parlor, the first in the area, and the ice had to be brought in from Lake Tahoe. Not a cheap endeavor, however, it paid off. It was considered the best restaurant in the area, frequented by people including Wyatt Earp, and even brought people into the Stingaree that probably wouldn't have ventured down there had it not been for the restaurant. If you had made the journey down, or if you were just a sailor who just rolled off of a ship in the harbor, then you could rent a room at one of the 33 rooms available on the upper floors. At the turn of the century, that section of the building was rented out by a woman named Madame Cora. Madame Cora claimed to be a fortune teller, but what she really was a madam of a group of colorful women in what she called her Golden Poppy Hotel. While her women may not have been the smartest or the prettiest, they were the hardest to miss. That was because Cora devised a marketing strategy that landed her in infamy. All of her ladies would be dressed in different vibrantly colorful dresses. If a male saw a lady he liked, he'd tell Cora the color he wanted, or perhaps just point and she would hand him a marble of the same color. She would then let him upstairs where he would find the door of the corresponding color where his chosen lady would have been waiting. What this did was eliminate a lot of the incriminating language used to solicit a prostitute. In fact, you could almost make the entire transaction silent. When the males were done, they would drop the marble in a bin and head out a secret staircase in the back so as not to be seen by anyone. This was important since a lot of the men that frequented the nicer brothels were not in fact criminals themselves, but wealthy businessmen from the Bank District. Another famous madam of the Stingaree was Madame Ida Bailey, a feisty red-headed woman, aren't they all, who operated the Canary Cottage, a brothel known to service the elite men of the area, including both the mayor and the chief of police. This is also why her brothel remained unscathed during the many raids on houses of ill repute, because she was always tipped off in advance. Like Cora, Ida had a marketing strategy. Instead of colorful dresses, she made her ladies dress as if they were going to an opera or a high society function. Not only were they dressing for the life they wanted, they were dressing in a way the men, or gentlemen callers as they referred to them, were used to. Her ladies were also educated, spoke eloquently, weren't allowed to smoke. Basically, what Ida did was take all the things these rich men expected of their wives, make sure her ladies could compete, and then marketed a spicy fantasy version of the life the men were already leading. Lady on the streets, freak in the sheets should have been the Canary Cottage motto. Much like the other madams we've discussed in previous episodes, Ida wasn't afraid of pissing other women off, so she'd rent a carriage every Sunday and take her ladies on a joyride through the high-class neighborhoods, marketing her girls much to the fury of the housewives. Here's what I find interesting about this, and it's something we see to this day. Women that are comfortable with their own sexuality or are okay talking about sex often get more hate for that from other women than men. We see it in every story of these madams, the housewives and wives of the customers waging a war against the women being paid for sex. In this case, the high society women were members of purity leagues. Honestly, it sounds super lame to me. But what is infuriating about that is they are putting all of the blame on the women instead of the husbands paying for sex with other women. It's a transaction that requires two parties, folks. For so long, women have been encouraged to not talk about sex, claiming it wasn't ladylike. And because of this ingrained taboo of expressing our own sexuality, women that don't conform to that are seen as sluts. And I'm sorry, but it's fucked up. The madams of the Stingaree were there because they needed the money. They saw an opportunity and they took it. They weren't high society like the women married to the bankers, wealthy landowners, and architects. They were never going to have a seat at that table, so they created their own. In a time where the West was wild and in so many ways anything went, social hierarchy still existed. The residents of the Stingaree were the poor, the unwanted, and within that bubble, they created their own reality. A place the rich liked to go to be invisible. It was essentially a way more criminal version of Vegas. They even had a saying similar to "what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas." But with poverty comes bad conditions, and the Stingaree was full of it. Lack of clean water, one of the biggest reasons Newtown originally failed, meant disease. Pair that with the amount of people living there in close quarters, the amount of drug use, unprotected sex, and just straight up murder. Make no mistake, this was a horrendous place to live for the people who didn't have another choice, and most who lived there died there. Few got out. Within this criminal structure, there is also a hierarchy, and not all of the prostitutes of the Stingaree operated out of a brothel. The women who maybe were a little rougher around the edges could operate out of a place called a crib or a stable. Basically, think of it as a barber shop where each barber rents a chair. These women rented teeny tiny rooms in which they would put their names on the front and service their customers in, all for a small rental fee. The area of town where these were absolutely some of the most seedy and not a place anyone would want to make their living. It is in these areas a lot of women would go missing, be found murdered, or worse. Bordering the Stingaree was Chinatown, an area far less criminal or debaucherous than its neighbor, yet still with its own spicy bits like a plethora of opium dens and gambling halls. For whatever reason, I have an absolute obsession with Victorian-era opium dens. I blame the Johnny Depp movie From Hell for that one, but regardless, that's the imagery I always get when thinking about opium dens of that era. Now, although things were fairly peaceful within the Chinatown community, that doesn't mean that drama didn't come. The Chinese were brought in to help build the railroads. When that industry started to slow, they turned to fishing, which was profitable. Then a bunch of assholes in 1882 held an anti-Chinese demonstration at Horton Hall, backing the Chinese Exclusion Act that essentially made it illegal to hire Chinese workers. The population of Chinatown went from 1,000 to 300, many leaving for fear of their lives since violent protests against them were frequent. As with all racism in America, the anti-Asian movement persists. We see it today with the growing number of hate crimes committed against both Asian Americans and Asian immigrants. Very often, the historical mass murders of the Chinese in various cities around the country are glossed over, and not enough attention is spent educating people on just how awful it was and still is for many in this country. Many of the old homes of the Stingaree are gone, lost to fires or just the hands of time. What is left are the beautiful stone Victorian buildings built by the more successful Stingaree residents. The crackdown on crime in the Stingaree around 1916 saw the end to much of what made any of the residents their money, so anyone that could leave left. Not much is known about what happened to Madame Cora, but Ida Bailey would be forced from her life as a madam and moved uptown, where locals would see her shuffling around town until her death. Although she did die penniless, the locals had a fondness for her, and every Christmas would bring her a basket filled to the brim with food. It's a sad end to such an interesting life. A trip to the gas lamp today may look a little different. There's no brothels or gambling halls, but it sure has its fair share of flowing liquor and drunken buffoonery. And if you look closely, golden historical plaques reminding anyone who stops to read them of the historical significance of the building they are standing in front of. Places like the Grand Horton Hotel even pay homage to Madame Ida Bailey, naming their restaurant after her. And for a while, there was a bar called Madame Cora's Marble Room. The truth is, all American cities are rooted in criminal pasts. Whether it's built up on the mass graves of the people slaughtered to claim that land, or a once thriving vice district where murder and prostitution were as common as a Starbucks, all of our cities have a story to tell. All we need to do is to take the time to just dig a little into their foundations to discover their secrets. Thank you guys so much for listening to today's tale. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please take a second to rate, review, and subscribe. If you haven't yet, please check out my YouTube channel. I have 4 shows where you can binge tons of haunted, macabre, and hilarious history, including the episode I did on the William Heath Davis house. So be sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new video. There's tons of daily content on my Instagram, and if you want to vote on what topics I cover in the podcast or send me, ideas, as well as get exclusive content, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon, which you can do for as little as $3 a month. It truly helps support all of the endeavors that I do and be able to bring you guys all of this content, so it means the world to me. All links are in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for being here, and until next week, chin chin creeps.